Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the EIB, or the Everything in Between podcast. My name is Justin Driscoll, Associate Pastor here at Genesis Church, and today we're joined, having an illustrious group of men that have been able to carve out some time to talk tonight about an important topic, the topic of Israel. So we're recording this on October 18th, 2023. I feel like whatever we say tonight probably should have an asterisk beside it because things are very much developing in real time in the Middle East and with the war that is going on between Israel and Hamas. And so tonight's going to be, I think, a really exciting night. This is our third episode here of the EIB podcast here at Genesis Church, and we're learning and adjusting and kind of changing things. And so we're definitely looking to get better at doing this. But tonight's topic is a big one. It's going to be very interesting discussion on Israel. We're primarily going to talk about it from a biblical and theological perspective. I don't think we're going to get hugely political or anything tonight, but we're going to look at the scriptures, and we're going to talk about some of the context and current events that are going on right now with the nation of Israel, and see what the Bible has to say about Israel. And so I think we're up for a good discussion. We have a couple new faces tonight. So you all know James Ginther, who is also on staff here, one of our teaching pastors at Genesis Church. I have actually my brother, Ryan Driscoll, here, a longtime member of Genesis, a lawyer by training and also a great student of the Bible. And then I have Michael Duncan, our longtime good friend and worship pastor here at Genesis Church, also a great student of the Word. He is probably the most Jewish among us, guys. Would you say that? He studied Hebrew. He has attended a Seder meal.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure, at least several, and probably planned a couple.
And my wife's Jewish.
And his wife's Jewish. So
there you go.
Point in case, right? Case in point. So I think we're in for a good discussion about Israel. So just a couple more things. Michael, you had talked with Pastor Wayne about a prayer service. Is that right? Can you give us a quick 30-second overview of what you're hoping to do there?
So in this time when there's a lot of unrest in the world, and Israel's under intense heat right now, and I feel led to have a praise and prayer time here at the church. I'm shooting for next Thursday, so I'm going to get ready to make the announcement. And do you have the date on that? Next Thursday.
As what next Thursday is? I can get it real quick there.
So it would be around 6:30,
October 26th.
October 26th. And what we'll do is we're going to just have some purposeful time of prayer for Israel and the situation. I mean, the Palestinians as well. We want to pray, for those on either side of the conflict, and but we want, we just want to lift it up because we know the promise of God, and that we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And right now, there's not peace. So coming here and having specific prayer points and different people to come up and pray, and also sing some songs that are reflective of Jerusalem and the situation.
So October 26th?
Yeah, October 26th.
All right, good. And then next week, I think the topic for the EIB podcast is all going to be on Halloween. Should Christians celebrate Halloween? What's the history of Halloween? And what is an appropriate response to a cultural phenomena right now? It's everywhere, every channel, every neighborhood, every...
Seems like it should be a short podcast, right?
It might be. It might be.
One
That's
word
true.
answer.
Probably should have done that a couple weeks ago.
One word answer.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you're giving it away. All right, well, good. Well, thanks, guys. Let's have a conversation here at the table tonight about Israel. We met Monday night. We had a good discussion, I think, to kind of prepare for this Monday night. This topic, I think all of us kind of feel like it can be somewhat overwhelming. It's also very timely discussion, but it's also, there's so much to think about and to talk about here about the nation of Israel. So, Ryan, maybe if I could start with you and maybe give us some context, kind of context of where, what's going on currently as we know it in Israel, and then kind of thinking back a little bit and some of the key events that have taken place as far as the modern Israeli timeline, some of the things that have happened that has led to here. I think before you answer that, I think we can all acknowledge we live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We don't live in Jerusalem. We don't live in Tel Aviv. We are not Palestinian or Israeli descent. You know, we don't have that perspective, right? We're coming at this as Western Christians who love the Bible and love God and want to talk about things rightly. And so I think, you know, we can acknowledge and be honest with the fact that we don't know everything. We have not lived in their shoes. We have not walked in that land very often anyways, and maybe some of us have been there, but that was quick in and out, right? So I think that's a fair thing to acknowledge that we're going to do our best to talk about this in an honest way. So Ryan, if you could start with kind of give us some highlights of the timeline and how we got to where we're at today in Israel.
Sure. So have any of you guys been to Israel, James or Mike?
Never.
No, I haven't either.
I have.
What year were you there?
2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
From my understanding, I have not been there. I want to go. I think it would be phenomenal to go and see the Holy Land. But the state itself of Israel is the size of New Jersey, and New Jersey's very small. We were there this past summer on a family vacation, and inside of the state there are two partitions. One's called the Gaza Strip because it literally is a strip of land. It is very small. And then there's something called the West Bank, which is on the eastern part of the land of Israel. And on October 7th, and the Gaza Strip is in southern Israel, borders Egypt and Israel.
It's not that far from Tel Aviv. As well,
right, yeah, Tel Aviv's in the south as well.
Yeah.
But in Gaza is controlled by a terrorist group that's called Hamas, and Hamas invaded Israel with terrorist militants through various means, and they murdered like 1,400 Jews, and the numbers keep increasing. And it was all broadcast online, and some of the most atrocious and heinous things that you could ever think of were done on that day. And since then, the Israeli military has taken its highly advanced soldiers to invade Gaza, and that's in the process of doing that now. But leading up to that, and you guys feel free to weigh in on or jump in on any of this. But Israel itself was not a state until 1948, after the United Nations passed what's called Resolution 181, and that was on the heels of the Holocaust, and with the murder of 6 million Jews during World War II. And as a result of that, it created the nation state of Israel. And throughout since 1948, there have been various wars that have caused the size of the state to increase and then decrease. And it's been constant conflict since 1948. But the very fact that Israel even exists as a state is remarkable in itself. And I don't know if Justin's turning to Ezekiel, but Ezekiel 36 talks about this, verse 24 specifically, where Ezekiel, some of you biblical scholars may know more than me, but Ezekiel was written in the time of the Babylonian exile. And then Ezekiel prophesied that God would regather Israel in the midst of during their exile. This is what he told them. And most Christians, or a lot of Christians, at least evangelicals, believe that the regathering that Ezekiel 36 is talking about happened in 1948. And so we are living in biblical prophecy taking place all around us right now.
I think it'd be fitting to read that verse.
Yeah,
that
Mike, you want to read
Sure.
chapter 36?
So Ezekiel 36, 23 and 24 says, I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned among the heathen, which you have profaned in the midst of them. And the heathen shall know that I am the Lord, says the Lord God, when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes. For I will take you from among the nations. I'm going to translate heathen to nations. I'm reading King James here.
Nice.
And he says, I will take you from among the nations and gather you out of all countries, and I will bring you into your own land.
So before, do you guys know, before 1948, it wasn't, who was in charge of Israel at that time? Like, it seems like it's relevant because from my understanding, there were multiple empires that basically just traded hands of who was in charge of it, right? And there wasn't like an actual Jewish state.
I always thought it was like the Ottoman Turks. Like right after World War I, they kind of lost grip. Was Britain?
Yeah, it was Britain, and then before that was the Turks.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, even if you go back, right? I mean, sorry, Mike, but even going back to the ancient history, the Jews were, conquered in 586 BC, going way back to that, and then the Romans and the Byzantines and the Ottomans and the British
Crusaders.
and the UN has always been involved, and then in 1948, there was it came together as we know it today.
Right.
I just wanted to make the comment that in the 1800s, I'm not sure exactly which year, maybe 1860s, something like that, 50 years before the Balfour Declaration in 1917.
Which is what, Mike?
What?
The Balfour Declaration.
That was a declaration from, that was somebody from the British, I'm not sure exactly.
It created the British Mandate, I believe.
Yeah, and he was, there was a declaration that went forth, and he went and got approval from the government to declare that the land of Palestine should be committed to the Jews, should be given to the Jews, and it was
Right.
basically setting in motion all of the processes needed to do that, and that Britain should grant that land to them.
Yeah.
But I was going to mention that Mark Twain visited there. He's a poet, and he wrote about it. And he was he marked in his writings that it was a desolate land, and he said he didn't see a soul when he was going through there, except maybe a tent or two. But there was no permanent habitations.
When was this?
This was in the 1800s, 50 years before 1917.
Which is exactly what Ezekiel prophesied, that what was
Yeah.
empty and desolate would no longer
Yeah.
be that way.
I had some quotes, and they were quite interesting because he also remarked about how all the people groups over the years, they're no more. What some of Israel's enemies and some of the people in those lands, even the Romans and other people groups that were mighty people, ceased to be. But the Jews, even though they were cast out to various nations, they're still there. They're still a people, and it's the hand of God.
So I think that's a good thing maybe to talk about, because especially in most evangelical Christians have a very favorable view of Israel, right? There's the Jews have the right to exist in that land. And again, like there are many people who believe they don't. There are many people who believe they do. It's been a battle for forever. But for what scriptures can we point to that we would justify and say that the Jews have that it's their land? What are some of those scriptures that often are pointed to?
There's a lot.
I mean, the ones that kind of jump out to me are Romans 9, 10, and 11, right? Where, especially in chapter 11, where it talks about how the church, we Gentiles, are the wild offshoot, right? Like, we are not the original branches, but Israel is the original branches. And we were engrafted in, as Romans 11 says, we were engrafted in to be part of something that is unnatural, right? The wild offshoot is not part of the natural tree. Israel was, and Israel the branches have been broken because of their unbelief, and the church has been engrafted in, right? And so, but Paul's very clear to say that we as a church should not be arrogant towards Israel at all, because Paul says that if God was willing to break the natural branches, don't think that he won't break you off as well if you fear and unbelief just like Israel did. So the church, the perspective of the church should be one of honor and reverence towards Israel because of who they are, not because they are necessarily any different as a people, but they are God's chosen people set aside. And the scripture is pretty clear that they have an incredible history still yet in front of them as a nation and as a people, based on what Romans, especially 11, but 11 to 12 says.
There's many passages. First of all, we have to remember his promise to Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
And
In Genesis,
He
right?
literally called him out of what would be Iraq, and he said, follow me. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to show you a land. And he promised it to his heritage, to his seed. And we know that this takes on two different meanings, because we understand like there's actual physical seed that are it's the nation of Israel. My wife is a descendant of Jewish people, so she has that physical connection. But it says in Genesis 28 here, and this is when Jacob had the dream at Bethel, and the Jacob's ladder came down, and he said that your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in thee thy seed shall all, in thee and thy seed shall all of the families of the earth be blessed. And so that's where the Gentiles come in. We are the nations that were blessed through the nation of Israel that God had promised Abraham's seed. But so we get to partake, and that's what you were talking about, the being grafted in. God did something amazing because you have the root and you have the branches, but in Ephesians it talks about of these two people groups, God made one new man. And so we all have a spiritual heritage, but God entrusted the oracles of God to the Jewish people, and he has dealt with, he called them out. They were a physical people, and he, because of his promise, it comes down to God's promise. I believe that is why we support Israel, because
Yeah.
God promised this people,
Right.
and he has not forsaken them. He has not cast them away,
Yeah.
Right.
and he's still dealing with them today.
Well, in that section there that Ryan referenced in Romans 9, Paul actually says, if I could give myself, if I could basically exchange my life for their faith, I'd do it. That is, Paul was Jewish himself. Of course, he was a Pharaoh, but he had such love for
Pharisee.
his people. He was a Pharisee.
Yeah,
sorry.
and if he has love, and he's a Christian,
He wasn't
man,
a Pharaoh.
He
was
wasn't a Pharaoh.
Oh, okay. That was good.
He wasn't from Egypt.
He wasn't from Egypt. That's good.
If Paul has love in his heart for Israel and for his countrymen,
Right.
chances are God does too. And
Yep.
so, and
Yeah.
I don't know, whenever I gave my life to Christ and the Spirit of God came in and it dwelt in me, there was a love for Israel. It's just a bind. There's a bond there that is difficult to explain, but it's like a brotherly bond.
You referenced which Genesis what, Mike?
28.
Okay, so another one is Genesis 12. Similar was Abraham,
Covenant.
the covenant. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the people on the earth will be blessed through you. And I think that's another kind of if you think about putting a pin on something, right, or hanging a sign, that's one of the signs that the church often references, that we support Israel because of this, And so what you referenced with Abraham and this one as well. Any other scriptures, James, that you were thinking of as well,
So-
that kind of formulate our support of Israel as a church?
Yeah, I think it's right along those lines. We see there seems to be two aspects of Jewishness. You have the faith of Jewishness, where they're believing in Yahweh, the God throughout the Old Testament. And then there's a nation of Israel that are actually Jewish people. And I think that's distinguished, because Paul is very careful in Romans, especially in chapter 2. He says that a Jew is not one that's one outwardly, but one that's inwardly. That circumcision, which was the sign of being Jewish, counts for nothing unless the heart is also circumcised. So you have this idea that true Jewishness is a belief in Jesus. So that's something that all the Orthodox Jews would probably be angry at. But Paul, he says that true Jewishness is a belief in the Messiah.
Having your heart circumcised.
Right. It's having
Yeah.
God's law written on your heart. That's part of the new covenant that he makes with his people. And it kind of goes into a theological aspect here, too. We're thinking of, like, we mentioned the Abrahamic covenant. We look at the new covenant that Jesus established. And so the question is, like, how do we look at biblical history? Do we see it through covenants, where God makes promises to his people, and that's how God acts according to his people, according to the promises that he makes? I think if we look at it from that perspective, then Israel has a clear right to the land, because when God makes his covenant with Abraham, he calls it an everlasting covenant that doesn't end. It doesn't have an end point to it. If you take another theological persuasion, perhaps dispensationalism, where they believe that God acts differently in different dispensations, different periods of time, where God acts according to what time period it is. And so, like,
Meaning he would change his behavior based
Right.
upon what was going on.
right, so like you have a dispensation of grace, you have a dispensation of works, you have all these different dispositions. And so, like, I think when we look at things biblically, I think that it kind of points to God acts according to his promises. God acts according to what he said he will do. And so it even ties right into biblical prophecy, where God said, I will bring you together again as a nation. And so if God said it, he's going to do it. That's the essence of faith, that we don't believe just in God, but we believe that God is going to do what he says he's going to do.
Yeah. So it's also important to note that the Christians, if this was all happening spiritually, like the return to the land, and as Christians, we are grafted in, and sometimes people, they allegorize the coming back into the land, and they dismiss and say, oh, the Israel that's there, has nothing to do with God bringing them back into the land. And but it's important to recognize that God is concerned about the physical world, and so he wants to have a physical sign in the world so that eyeballs can see it. You know what I mean? And because if it's all happening in the spirit, people of the nations or unbelievers, God said he would be sanctified in those nations.
Yeah.
Right? And so he's bringing them back as a physical sign of his faithfulness into the land. And we, as, we're partaking of spiritual Israel. And, like you said, a Jew is not, a Jew is not one inwardly. What was that?
Outwardly.
Yeah, outwardly.
Yeah.
So you could actually be a Jew inwardly as well. And a Jew is, somebody that's of the called of God. And we as Christians, we answer the call of Messiah, and we are grafted into that heritage. So I just wanted to highlight the natural and the spiritual and the physical sides of.
Absolutely. And we have this conversation quite often, that God uses the physical world to represent more spiritual realities.
Correct.
That are even more true than what we see in the physical world.
And so even though Israel's abiding in unbelief right now as a nation, there are people that are coming to faith in Jesus by the droves today. There's a lot of Christian churches, and just Spirit of God is moving mightily in the land. But we read in Paul's writings in Romans 11 that there's a thing called the times of the Gentiles. And so it says Israel is going to be hardened until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And so you get this image. Why would he say that? You get this image that they're going to abide in unbelief. The Christians are going to believe, and there's, it says in the word that Christians even have the capacity to provoke Jews to envy because they see us in the Old Testament. They see us loving God's word and loving Israel, and they're like, what is wrong with you people?
Well, on that
You know?
point, Mike, I wrote down verse 15 out of that, and it says that if the Jews' rejection of Christ means reconciliation of the world, right? Like the entire world, the gospel is going forth into the whole world because of the rejection of Messiah. What will their acceptance mean but life from the dead?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's incredibly profound.
It's given a picture that God is going to turn back to the nation of Israel and literally have a massive revival in the Jews that are in that land at that time, that the terminal generation that's going to see Jesus come out of the sky, and the blinders are going to come off when the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And we need to love Israel.
I think the other thing that's been, I've been, I don't know about you guys, but I've been completely enamored, I don't know if that's the right word or not, but like I really only like read the news about Israel and Hamas right now. Like there's all kinds of other things going on, like, the House doesn't have a speaker, and, there's all kinds of problems going on in the world. But I really only focus on what's happening in Israel. And one of the things I've been thinking about, especially after reading Ezekiel 36 and then Romans 9 through 11 again, is just how much God is in control of the nations, right? So, depending on who you talk to in our country, depending on your political stripes, you may be extremely downcast about our country and feel like we're a post-Christian country, and there's problems as long as you're armed, and people feel like the country, there isn't a way to come out of it. But when you read Ezekiel 36 and you read Romans 9 through 11, it is very clear that God is in control of nations. And Ezekiel 36 is saying that God is the one that's going to make this happen in Israel. Not because of who Israel is, but because of God, of his name's sake, right? He said that you, speaking to Israel, you profaned my name across the nations.
Yeah.
But I'm going to call you back into the land that I gave you in Genesis 15, which is like basically like a real estate transaction in Genesis 15. I'm going to call you back in for my name's sake. And I think for us as believers, as followers of Jesus, we can be incredibly heartened in these very dark times. And, if you read the news long enough, it's incredibly terrible stuff going on right now. But we can also take heart at these times because we know that God is in complete control of everything that's going on, and none of this is taking him by surprise. But to the contrary, it's exactly what he said would happen in Scripture is happening right now.
I think it's really cool to that point that God's hand. I mean, God has always dealt with Israel that way, right? I mean, when they rebelled and they put up idols and they, when they would pull away from the Lord in their faith, he would always send a messenger, right? He would always call them back, or a judge, or he would do something to get their attention, to cause them to repent. I think it's really heartening that as we read in Romans 10, of course it's every Christian's favorite, verse. That's in Romans 10. You forget it's actually in that section about Israel.
I did. I saw that.
Did you see
I
that?
totally forgot it was in that section.
In 10:8, it says, "But what does it say? The word is near you. It's in your mouth and it's in your heart. That is the message concerning faith that we proclaim. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved." And it goes on. 14, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? How can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? How can they hear without someone preaching it to them? We always interpret that often as Gentiles, as Westerners. We interpret that as like, well, that's our individual. That's the call for us to preach to other people, but he's talking about Israel.
Yeah, it's more of a
It's
nation.
more of about
call.
about Israel. And it says, and how can anyone preach unless they are sent? How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Then 16, but not all the Israelites accepted the good news. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our message? Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. Did they not hear? Of course they did. He goes on and on and on with that. But I found that that's a great reminder that 9, 10, and 11 is like this. Of course, it's after 5 through 8, which is such a powerful set of chapters there in Romans, and then he inserts this section to his brothers and
Right.
about the Jews, and so God has not forgot them.
Yeah, there's a remnant. There's always a
Right.
remnant that
Right.
God is able to preserve, and we see that in Israel today, that he's got a remnant of people that
Right.
he's going to bring back from the descendants of the physical Jews. So
Yeah, and at the end he says, all day long I've held out my hands to a disobedient and obstinate people. If that's not the heart of God. And hopefully, even in the midst of all of this that's going on, I know the nation of Israel wants justice. As a government and as a nation, they want justice of what's going on. But God is also doing things, and He's moving on people's heart in the midst of this situation that's going on there in Israel. So, any other scriptures we wanted to draw out about
Psalm
Israel?
122.
Go
is-
ahead, Mike. Yeah.
I was just going to read that real quick. Psalm 122. It says, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love you. Peace be within your walls and prosperity in your palaces. For my brethren and companions' sake, I will now say, peace be within you. Because of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good." And then also in Genesis 12, he says, "I will bless those that bless thee,
Yeah.
and curse those who curse you." And
Yeah, those are two. Any other scriptures on that before we? Okay, so we only have maybe 10 or 15 minutes left at the most here, but one of the things we talked a little bit about this last night, or Monday night when we were preparing for this, but there were, as the church or as Christians, that Israel is dealing with the Palestinian people, and so I think I think it would be important, like who are the Palestinians is one question I think we want to answer. And then the second question is, are we able to support Israel and still have compassion for the Palestinians? Right? I feel like there's a vibe going on right now that if there's any pro, not pro of what happened, but any pro-Palestinian discussion, it's like there's this immediate wrath comes down on people. So let's answer the first question. Ryan, I don't know if you have it there. Who are the Palestinian people historically? Who are the Palestinians? Do you want to answer that first, and then we can?
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is a little complicated, but they
is.
come from that part of the world, and they're kind of a blend of a lot of different people groups. Is probably the simplest way to say it. I mean, they're culturally, they're Middle Eastern culturally, they're Arab. Their primary religion is Sunni Islam. There are some Christians within Palestinian people, which you never ever hear about. I mean, there's estimated to be 14 million Palestinians, where most of them, or at least a big portion of them anyways, reside in the West Bank, which again is in the eastern part of the state of Israel, and then also the Gaza Strip, obviously. So they are primarily located there. They're also in Jordan. There's actually refugees in Jordan. In fact, I was reading some of the resources we were looking at prior to this. And did you guys know before October happened, in July of 2023, Israel took 2,000 soldiers and was not attacking, but they were dealing with problems that was in a refugee camp that included mostly Palestinians because of things going on in July. So there was a large ground force then. In May, the Hamas and Israel exchanged like 2,000 rockets firing back and forth at each other just in May of this year, right? So the Palestinians and the Israelis have been fighting this year multiple times, with October 7th kind of culminating in the worst of it. But, I mean, 2,000 rockets is nothing to sneeze at either. And so that's primarily who they are, generally speaking. But a lot of them don't have any land. They don't have a citizenship anywhere. They're stateless people is the legal term for them. They don't have anywhere to go, which is why they live in refugee camps.
And mostly, though, in the West Bank and Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
That's their
Yes.
most of.
Most of them
And there's, legal battles going on between, where, homes there in Israel and
they're
Palestine.
called settlements, where Israel
Settlements,
comes
yeah.
in. Yeah.
So it's extremely complicated. Okay, so we have a group of people who, are living there, living amongst Jews and living in the nation there. And so as the church, right? I mean, we want to be compassionate. We want to have this mindset of, we support Israel, we love Israel, but knowing that there's a human component to this that's going on there, that there are millions of people displaced. I think they are restoring humanitarian aid today anyways. And, so James, what do you think? What's your take on this? I mean, as the church, how do we respond, in a Christ-like manner, knowing that we don't agree with anything that Hamas has done recently, but there is a human component to this as well? And how do we face that as Christians?
I think as Christians, we have to realize our loyalty does not lie in nation states, but lies in God and what God has set forth. So what that means is, like, where Israel defends itself, we can support that and say, yes, they should have the right to defend themselves. Where Israel goes in and kills innocent people, according to some reports, we can say objectively as Christians, no, that's wrong. They shouldn't be killing innocent people.
Yeah.
Same thing vice versa, where Palestinians are living and they're just trying to live life. We can have compassion on them. We can pray for them. Where Hamas, whenever they attack, we can objectively say, no, this is evil, this is wrong. And so it isn't just blindly saying one side is always right, one side is always wrong. It's objectively looking at what's happening and saying, this is good. This is something that is allowed by God. You're allowed to protect yourself. You're allowed to defend yourself. You're not allowed to exterminate an entire group of people. You're not allowed to turn a land into a parking lot, so to say. Not saying that Israel's doing that, but I'm saying that's where the line is.
Right.
And so,
I think it's important also make a distinction between Palestinian people and like Hamas terrorists.
Sure.
Because all Palestinians are not Hamas terrorists, right?
Right.
Just as much as when we were in Afghanistan, everybody wasn't part of Al Qaeda. They were Afghanis, right? It's the same. They're Hamas terrorists, actors, and militants, and people that are training specifically to go into Israel and kill as many
Right. I mean,
people as
Hamas
possible.
exists to destroy Israel, right?
Right, that's in their charter.
That's in their charter.
Yeah, very uplifting group
But
of
that is
people.
not all of the Palestinian people, right?
No.
And so there will be, and thinking about it from a evangelical standpoint, I mean, I pray it'll be an opportunity to bring more Palestinians to Christ as well. That there will be, that through this terrible situation, will there be humanitarian efforts that will lead to gospel opportunities, in the future? I hope so. But Mike, what is your take on this this part of the topic as well?
Well, it's important for Christians to, like Jimmy said, see past those dividing walls, because every person is made in the image of God, point blank. And I just saw a wonderful story on CBN where there was a guy from Hezbollah. As you guys know, that's that group that is north of Israel that they're thinking is going to jump in. And he was a faithful Muslim, and he prayed, hours a day, and he was militant, and he did everything that the Hezbollah group told him to do, and he thought he was earning his way to God. He was very sincere. And he had a vision one night, and a figure appeared in his room. it was a glowing, it was just a light emanating, and he just knew that he was in the presence of God, and so he ran it, and he felt very sinful. He ran in the corner, and then he felt a hand on his body, and then he felt immediately forgiven, and he asked who his name was, and he says, "The way, the truth, and the life" is what was said to him. And as a Muslim, that resonated with him because they always talk about themselves being on the way, and he felt that Hezbollah was on the way to God. And so then he says, "But, what is your name?" And he said, "Jesus Christ." He gave his heart to Christ, and he happened to be in Israel when the attacks happened just recently. And he was there with the victims of the attack, this Arab guy in Hezbollah, saved by Christ, and he was weeping in front of the families, saying, "I'm so sorry that you have to go through this." And that is what Jesus can do. And so we should not harbor hate in our hearts for any people group.
Yeah.
Christ tells us to love our enemies. And so we need to be above reproach and love every single person. I don't care, love Russians, Iranians. There's
Yeah.
beautiful people created in the image of God. But, we have to take a stand against wickedness to protect life. And as the nation of Israel is doing right now, they want to knock out the very vitriolic, dangerous people. And as a nation, they're doing that. But as individuals, we need to love. And even those soldiers, they need to have compassion. They need to not want to hurt innocent people. And so that's the way I
Yeah.
feel about it. And because everybody, including yourselves, you're not beyond the grace of God. And we have to extend that grace, because I'm talking the hardest Hamas person that was even in charge
Yep.
can have a Saul of Tarsus moment. And in fact,
Yeah.
we could pray for that, and that's what we're going to do in next week.
Well, I mean, we read, on Sunday, about a centurion, a soldier, Cornelius getting saved. I mean, I can't wait for those stories where Hamas soldiers, to your point,
Yeah.
Mike, are going to come to Christ and repent of, walking around and killing innocent people and taking hostages. That's the heart of God, that all will come to repentance.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to see these atrocities committed on both sides,
It is.
and just watching people die in the bombings that are defensive bombings that are happening, and then also the deliberate, gruesome attacks. It's so hard, and my heart goes out to the victims. I weep for them, and and I just pray that through Christ's healing, that there can be forgiveness in both of those situations.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we as Christians at this time, we really need to, I think we need to really make sure that we are staying on mission, right? So Luke 21 is, for the youth Bible study that Monica and I lead, we were studying Luke 21 last week, and I think it's so apropos to what we're talking about tonight, because the world is in a state of chaos, right? The world is in, going through tumultuous times right now. And in Luke 21, and I won't go through the whole thing, but I just want to hit a couple highlights of it that I think are really relevant for what we're talking about tonight, where Jesus was asked a question about the temple, and he said that the temple, not one stone would be left on top of another. And remember, the temple was the pride and joy of the Jewish nation at that time. It was the center of life. It was the center of religious worship. And Jesus just, I don't know if he said it casually, but he says, you see the temple, it's all going to be gone. Not one stone will be left. And for a person hearing him at that time, that would have wrecked their entire world.
They probably would have laughed at him.
No, they probably would have laughed at him because it took so many years to build and
Right.
was so sturdy. But Jesus goes on to say that essentially that the temple is going to be destroyed, and then nation will rise against nation, kingdom will be against kingdom, there'll be earthquakes, there'll be famines, there'll be pestilences, there'll be terrors, there'll be all kinds of signs from heaven. But he says, then he goes on to say that mothers and fathers will deliver their children, brothers and sisters will turn on each other, you will be persecuted, but through all of this tumultuous time, Jerusalem's going to be surrounded. There will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. The earth will be in distress. Nations will be perplexed. Everything seems like it's going to be falling apart. But then he ends it and he says that, but you, follower of Jesus, Christian, you watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation, which is vanities, basically, wasting your life, wasting your time and energies. But you watch. You don't get drunk and care about this world to such an extent that you cannot see and look up. You are so weighed down, you can't even look up anymore because it's so heavy. He says, it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth, but we must stay awake at all times. And so as to me, that's a mission statement. That is reminding us to stay on point. When everything else is like spinning out of control, we have to stay on point and stay focused so that we don't fall into what Jesus was talking about here in Luke 21.
It's also important to note that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against spiritual principalities and wickedness in high places. And so it's my desire to see that every person, every nation, recognize Israel as a work of God, and that they would love Israel. You know, even the Palestinians and the Iranians. But that is not in the hearts of people. You know, we're wrestling with a spiritual tug of war where Satan does not like the work of God. And so we need to be careful as people to make sure that our ideologies and our faith is founded in the living and true God, and that you don't find yourself an enemy against his work. And so I just appeal to everybody just to really search and find out why do you feel the way you do about Israel, and Christians for that matter, because that is the work of God, and God, He's commissioned us, and you just said not to lose sight of our mission.
Right.
He's commissioned us to go and win those nations. And how are we going to do that unless we have compassion on the people?
Right.
Well, I think that's a good summary right there. James, Ryan, Mike, thank you. It's a weighty topic. It's a timely topic. And so I think that's our desire. Our desire is to know the scriptures and point others to Jesus. And even in the midst of this turmoil that's going on, is to have a right biblical perspective of everything going on. So for all those you who have joined us, thank you for joining the Everything in Between podcast. And we will see you next week. Thank you.
Not you.
Not you.